to fail me if you did that. So you're a crackhead. The first family member. Like she's the first family member. You go back.
Hey everybody, welcome to our channel. Today I'm going to be talking about on this video the journey I'm going through with my son who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. This is my story. My name is Ladora. I am the founder and CEO of Life Legacy Foundation Incorporated, also AMIA, AMMIA, which is the acronym for Advocates for Missing Mentally Ill Adults. You can find us on all platforms on social media at Life Legacy Foundation Incorporated. For more information and to like, share, and follow, click the description box down below. So my son was born, he was 7 pounds, about 5.5 ounces. He was a beautiful, healthy baby boy. The only concern that they had after birth was the fact that they thought he had a heart murmur. And once that was confirmed through the ultrasound, determined he didn't even have that. My son never really had a cold. He was just always a cheerful, outgoing person. He got along with his sister who came along 2 years later. His cousins, he loved them. He was always playful and liked to go outdoors. He loved Pokemon, loved all kind of cartoons. He's an artist. Early on, I already knew that he was going to be able to draw really well. And so we kind of honed in on that skill for him, and he was basically anything by sight he was able to draw. And so as he got older, he participated in sports and things of that nature. We never had any problems with him as far as discipline, getting in trouble with the law or getting in trouble at school or anything like that. So one thing I can say about my son is that he was always quiet. He did like his quiet time. He didn't mind being by himself, just into his own thoughts per se. He could be in his room for hours just drawing and coloring or just watching cartoons and things like that. But then he also had that social interaction part where he would get outside and play football and play basketball and ride his bike and be up and down the street, just like what normal kids do. So I didn't have any reason to believe that there would be anything like this coming along in the future. And so we got into our high school years, and most people know when you're dealing with a preteen, teenager, especially going through their high school years, that's when the transformation usually takes place, and they're more rebellious and try to kick against the prick. But that wasn't my son. Like, honestly, I had probably one of a kind kid that I raised. He was very direct in what he wanted or did not want, and he was just an ideal child to raise. And so I always applauded him for that, just never giving me any kind of pushback or anything like that. And so once we moved out of Kansas City, we moved into a small town, and he was on the basketball team. And I feel like we experienced a little prejudice there, because my son was very good at shooting, and everybody who played basketball with him knew that he was a shooter. If he couldn't do anything else, he knew how to do that part well. And so long story short, he decided he didn't want to be on the basketball team anymore. And that was a concern for me because I knew that that kept his mind occupied. And the other thing with him, I just felt like too, because his grades were decent, you know, he didn't have a reason not to be on the team. But what I found out later is that they did random drug tests, and he had gotten into smoking marijuana, and this is before I had knowledge of it. And so I never understood why he didn't want to play anymore. It wasn't because he wasn't getting the playing time. It was just because he enjoyed the recreational use of marijuana, which at that time in Missouri was not legal. And especially he was underage, so he shouldn't have been doing it anyway. So fast forward to his senior year, we had moved back into the Kansas City metropolitan area, and he graduated high school. So his senior year of high school, he was so excited about graduating and everything. We were getting all of his senior things together, and one of the biggest things, they only get 10 tickets, and our family is huge. So 10 tickets was not enough. So he had already said who he wanted tickets for. And so his dad was one of the people on the tickets. So to kind of give you a little backstory on that, his dad and I divorced when he was about maybe 4 or 5 years old. And so we haven't had the best relationship. His father was the kind of person that if we weren't together, then he didn't want to necessarily have a relationship with his children. So that really affected Tyler in a negative way. And so throughout Tyler's teenage years, I knew how he felt about having a relationship with his dad, that he really wanted that bond. He really wanted that father figure in his life, and he never could get that. And so I would put Tyler in counseling periodically because I was just like, he's dealing with a lot. And even though he didn't always express it out loud, I could just kind of feel his pain. As a mother, you can look into your child's eyes and see that there is something deep rooted that they're missing. And that was one of the things. And periodically he would ask, well, why didn't you stay with my dad? Why didn't you? I couldn't work it out, because his dad had already given him his narrative, but he never heard the truth come from me. So as a teenager, I believe it was his senior year in high school, he asked me about why we weren't together. And I sat both of my children down and I explained to them from very beginning what happened and why I could not stay in that unhealthy relationship. And even with that explanation, Tyler really didn't grasp it and accept it the way that my daughter did. It just couldn't resonate with him why I couldn't just force that relationship, whether it was healthy or not. And so as we were getting ready for his graduation and everything, he had his dad's name on the list for one of the persons to get one of the 10 tickets. And I immediately said to him, I don't think he's going to come, because I knew how absent he had been for all of the other major events that my kids had in their lives. So I didn't want to give him false hope. And so he said, yeah, he's going to come. I talked to him. He said he'll be there. I said, okay. So graduation day came, and he was a no-show. And that did something to Tyler's spirit. It really kind of broke him down, but he didn't want to show it. He had his own transportation. He had a job during his senior year, and after he graduated, he was enrolled in a junior college there in Missouri. So he was doing well, but he was still missing a part of him, and that was the relationship with his father. And so he decided that he was going to go that summer and stay with his father. And I said that that was not a good idea, especially without, asking him and getting a clear plan laid out as to what that would look like. But he was determined to do it anyway. And at this time, he was smoking marijuana more often, and he was often smoking it in my home. And I would come home and it would just reek of that smell, and we would kind of have our talks about that. And so I think he felt at liberty to go stay with his father because he had more freedom to do the things that I would not allow him to do, especially in my home. And so that's where I kind of saw the beginning of where it all kind of unraveled. Some of the early signs that I saw that something was wrong with my son, after I told him that he was not to smoke marijuana in my house. Mind you, my son has always been obedient. I'm not saying that he wasn't mischievous sometimes and do things that normal kids do to get in trouble, but he wasn't ever disobedient or just outright defiant to me. And it was like 2, 3, 4 times I had told him, do not smoke in my house. And he would spray all this air freshener. And I'm just like, it wasn't like him. So that was unusual for me. The next thing came, like we would be riding in the car and he'll say, where did I come from? How are you my mom? And I would think he was just kidding around, like, and I would say, boy, stop playing, don't do that. And he's like, I'm not. Where did I come from? And then he would just ask me like a series of random questions that I know that he knew the answer to. And then he would just give me too much information. We call it TMI, about things that he had done and stuff. And he had never done that before. And I just felt like that was bizarre. And then in the home, I would come home from work sometimes and my canned goods would be lined on top of the counter, on the ledge, on top of the counter, just lined up. My toaster and can opener would just be sitting in the sink. So the paranoia came in, where I could see the paranoia start was the big screen TV that I had in my living room. I saw one day when I sat down that the little sensor was covered up. And that concerned me. I'm like, well, why would the sensor be covered up? We can't turn the TV off and on without having that sensor, but the sensor would blink when you turn it on or blink when you turn it off. And so that was a trigger for him. Like, he felt like people were watching him. His cell phone was a trigger because he would tape up the camera. And he was on social media because that's when social media was really becoming popular. And so he was on Facebook and he had an Instagram. He would take pictures and stuff. And next thing I know, he had deleted all his social media. And he had the camera on his cell phone taped up. And then in his room, he would never open the windows. And I'm a big person as far as sunlight is concerned. And he's always been a tidy person. And I noticed that his room would always be a mess. And he had never kept his room like that before. So it was little things like that, to the point where I asked him one day, I understand you're smoking marijuana, but do you think you were laced? I thought that was the problem. Like, maybe he got a hold of a bad strain. Maybe somebody laced it with something and it was affecting his thinking and things like that. But that didn't seem to be the case. One day, my daughter came home from school and he was just sitting on the roof, just dangling his legs off the roof. He had took the screen off of his window and literally climbed on the roof and was just waiting up there. And then we couldn't say his name anymore. He told us we could not speak his name out loud. And I'm like, well, how are we supposed to get your attention if we can't speak your name out loud? He changed his name to B. Brown, which I don't know where that came from. But he changed his name, and I'm just like, okay. But he didn't want his real name to be called out because he was so paranoid that the police were after him, and that even when we were in the car together, I couldn't have the radio on because he said that they could hear our conversation. Now, my son has never been in trouble with the law. The only encounter he's had with the police were traffic tickets. So other than that, he's never been arrested. No other encounters with the law to my knowledge. And he just always had a fear of going to jail or getting in that kind of trouble, which was a blessing. And so I just felt like all these things. And then he began to, one day he made a threat at the high school where my nephew was going. He started off high school there. And he called up there to where they were getting ready to lock the school down. And because my nephew knew what was going on with his mental health, he explained that situation to them, and so they just allowed him to, the police to bring him back to my mom's house. And so there were a series of those things that let me believe that he was hearing voices and that something wasn't right. So right before his 19th birthday, I said, look, something is going on with you. It's more than marijuana, because I don't know marijuana to act and do the things that you're doing. Maybe you need to get evaluated. He didn't say that he was hearing voices, but his behavior would suggest that he was hearing voices, and that it would be doing his behaviors would be doing things that was out of his character. And one day I was literally sitting on the couch like I am now on a Saturday, and he's just pacing back and forth in front of the TV, in front of me, as if I was not even there, having a full conversation with himself.
Who are you talking about?
Chester the molester. Where are you? Man, your brother, he a homosexual. Put that gold tooth in his mouth. That nigga androgynous. Yes, man. These niggas out here trying to smuggle some dope. Boy, you ain't smuggling nothing. Boy, you smuggling beef, pop, and wrestling, you know what?
I mean, he, just as if I were talking to another person and they were responding back to me, he was responding to himself and talking to himself. And for me, that was the straw, because I'm like, something is desperately wrong and you need to get some help. And I had shared some of my thoughts and what was going on with some family members, and they didn't believe it. Like, oh, he's just playing. People thought he was obsessed with getting a check, meaning a Social Security or SSI check. And at that time, my son was naive to all of those things. There's no way he knew a check would be associated with that, because he was about getting money. Mind you, my son held a job down and he was working so well that he even got awarded at his job for being a superb employee. He would go in on holidays, he would pick up extra shifts, he would work overtime. He was working at a convenience store and he was cooking, so he even earned his whatever you get for a food handler's license. Like, he was on track, and he was going to junior college, like took the test, got in, and he was doing well. So there's no way that he thought that he could fake something this extravagant and then say he wanted a check because he loved working, because that supported his marijuana habit. And so I'm like, no. So I decided that I was going to have to take control and just do this journey on my own. Once I convinced my son that he needed to seek mental health help, it took some coaching, but I walked him inside. He agreed to allow them to keep me in the loop with what was going on, because at that time, mind you, he was already 18. This was right before his 19th birthday. So he stayed in the facility voluntarily for 5 days. When I picked him up, his diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. And so he was given medication to take orally. And once he got home, he was taking them some days he would not. And then he ended up flushing the medication, because I would just ask him, like, hey, did you take your medication today? And he would say yes. Did you take your medication today? He would say no. And then the final time when I asked him about his medication, he said that he flushed it. And I was upset about it, but there was nothing that I could do, because he was over the age of 18. And so he was considered an adult, and that meant that he could do what he wanted to do, basically. And so I just kind of let it go. On top of that, he did not accept the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And because he didn't accept it, because he flushed his medications, he was all over the place. One day I was at work and I had called home. I called my daughter's cell phone, because at that time he had gotten rid of his cell phone. He didn't want a cell phone at all. And so I called my daughter and asked, was he there? And she said, yeah, I'm sure he's upstairs in his room. And I said, well, let him know that I'm on the phone. I want to speak to him. So she hollers up the stairs. He didn't respond. And so I said, well, instead of hollering, go up there, open the door, and see if he's there. So she did that, and she said, well, Mom, he's not here. And I said, well, that's weird, because he was always home. And so, but I didn't get concerned, because I thought, well, maybe he met up with some friends, which is not unusual, or he went to my mom's house, and which is not unusual. And so he liked to walk. And one thing about him, he will walk. He didn't need a bus or anything. And my mom lived pretty far from where we were. And so I said, it's not unusual. I came home that night, got up the next morning, and I saw that he still wasn't there. And I said, well, you know, maybe he's just feeling himself. He's graduated from high school. I can't control what he does because basically he's grown. And so I didn't worry about it. So the first night he didn't come home. Didn't hear from him the entire next day or night. And so I was talking to my daughter and I was like, well, this doesn't sound like him. So at this point, I'm calling family, I'm calling friends. Has anybody seen him? And everybody says, no, we haven't seen him. So even friends from high school who we had casual connections with, I was making connections with those people as well. At this point, we're about 5 days in to me not seeing him, not hearing from him. Now, in the process of getting his diagnosis, we filed for SSI for his disability. We filed for Medicaid for him to have insurance to cover his diagnosis, so when he went to doctor's appointments and things of that nature. So he got a check in the mail, a couple of checks, matter of fact, because they backdated them based off of when we first started. And the checks came in his name because, again, he's an adult, even though he has a mental health issue or diagnosis. And so around that 5th day, I said, I need to file a police report. So on September 27th, 2016, I had filed a police report with our local PD, and they wouldn't take the report. They said he's an adult and he is allowed to disappear. And those are the words that will resonate with me forever. And so I asked to speak to someone who was in charge because I refused to leave the police department. I explained to the person that was in charge, hey, this is my son. I realized that he is an adult, but he's still my son. And he has a recent mental health diagnosis. He is off his meds and I need help. He is a missing person and I need to file the report. And so they took the report and assigned an officer to my case. And from there, that's when we get into his first real psychotic break. So once the police agreed to file the report for the missing person, I then began to make my own connections. My family knew that he was missing, but I didn't want to make it public because I thought it would be something that would be temporary. Even though we were about a week in at that point with him being gone, I figured it would be maybe a few more days and he would come back. But that didn't happen. So when I saw that he hadn't come back, I contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. What I didn't know with them is that they will keep you on the national database until the person is 22 years old. And the officer that was assigned to me was very proactive, and he kept in constant contact with me. Any leads that he had, he always kept me informed, and he followed up on those leads. And so we were getting closer to Christmas. And so right before Christmas, I got a phone call from the officer in charge of my case, and he said, Ms. Johnson, we're going to have to close your case. We have no more leads. And I almost lost it because in my mind, you're giving up on my son and he hasn't been recovered yet. And even though I knew that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had out flyers in several different states, because I knew my son would either go to Colorado, because at that time it was not legal, marijuana was not legal in Missouri. So I knew that he would go to a state where it was legal. So that meant maybe Colorado, it could have meant California. And so my heart sank to my feet. And so I felt like I didn't have any other options. So all of this time, we fast forward, we're going into the 6th month of him being missing. No leads, no nothing. And the leads that I did receive were frivolous. Like, they didn't lead to anywhere. It's just people knowing that he was missing and decided they wanted to make up a story. And so We were coming into the month of April. So his birthday is April the 15th. And so it fell on a Saturday. And that night, before, I had spoke to God and I said, I don't want to be sad on my son's birthday tomorrow. I said this will be my first birthday without him, and this will be his first birthday coming out of his teen years. He'll be turning 20 years old. I said to God, today is his birthday. My only wish, my only prayer was to hear from him. And that could have been a call or email, anything to say he was dead or alive. Either way, I was going to be satisfied as long as I knew something about my son. And I had told God also, you gave me my son. If you take him away, I cannot even be mad because he was on loan to me in the first place. He was yours. He was just mine temporarily. So I had made up in my mind, whether he was dead or alive, I was willing to accept him in whichever way he was to give him to me. And so as night began to fall and we began to prepare for church the next morning, I was answering every phone call that came through, whether I recognized the number or not, because it was a potential lead. It was about a little after 10 and I was getting ready to head upstairs to bed and my phone rang and I saw that it looked like it was coming from Raymore Police Department. So I answered the phone and the officer said his name and my heart stopped. I just think it just completely stopped. It felt like it did. And he said, I have some information concerning your son. Now, mind you, this is the night of April 15th, which would have been his 20th birthday. And I said, yes. He said, I need you to call this number and talk to this officer at U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. I'm like, U.S. Customs? My son is out of the country? I'm like, what? He was like, I don't have the details. I need you to call them. So I immediately hung up the phone with him. I call the number to speak to the officer at U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. He said, we have your son. He's alive. I thought I could finally exhale in that moment because he wasn't dead. I'm like, thank God, he's alive. But what condition is he? And so they said, well, we caught him crossing the border from Mexico. That's where he had been. They said he even has on a shirt that says Mexico. And you'll see some pictures. He also had another piece of paper talking about Mexico and the border and all that kind of stuff. He had this on his person. They said, we questioned him. And they said he was really disheveled in his appearance. And they knew something was wrong. And they said they asked him his name. And he told them, he asked them about his family. He said that we were all dead and that he had cancer. And so just the bizarreness of his answers, they knew that it was something else going on with him. It wasn't just an arbitrary homeless person crossing that border or anything like that. And they couldn't tell me how he got into Mexico or how he came out. They just said it's easier to get into Mexico than it is to just walk out of Mexico. Now, mind you, at this time, my son had no identity on him, as far as he didn't have his driver's license, he didn't have social security card, he didn't have a birth certificate, because those the social security card that he had, his driver's license, everything, he got rid of anything that identified him. Because again, the paranoia. He didn't want to be identified because he thought the police were after him. The government was after him. And so they said, yeah, we have him here. We're going to take him to Yuma, Arizona, to the emergency room department. And we're going to hold him there. I said, please do that. I'm on my way out there. I can get there first flight in the morning. And so just to give you a little bit backstory on the driver's license and everything, when my son was first going through his mental health struggles before we had a diagnosis, I would let him borrow my car. And so he wanted to drop me off at work one day. And I said, well, you don't have your license anymore. You said you lost your license. And I said, if you're going to drive my car, you need to get it. So I gave him the money. He went to the DMV, got the paper. So while he was missing, the hard copy came into the mail. And so the next morning, I flew to Yuma after begging the emergency room charge nurse to hold him, because I explained to her the situation. And again, because he's an adult and because I didn't have any type of guardianship, anything in place, if he said he wanted to leave, then they would have had to let him go. But thankfully, they held him until after I got there. And because he left before the hard copy of his ID came in the mail, that meant I was able to fly him back to Kansas City from Arizona without a problem. So after I got my son back to Missouri, which is a complete challenge in itself, because he would only eat in the restroom at the airport. And then he kept talking about terrorism and communism and all kind of crazy stuff that will get you flagged when you're coming through the airport. And so I just was trying to stay calm, thinking that that would calm him down. So once I got him back to Kansas City, we landed, and we were deboarding, and I told him to wait for me. And so he was in front of me. Once we got out of the gate, getting ready to go through the exit doors, he took off running. Now, mind you, we landed at about 11:30 that night, and he took off. I had no idea where he ran to. And so at that point, I was just like, I'm exhausted. So I went home without him. And so the next day, my sister called me, and she was like, hey, Tyler called us, and we went to pick him up. We have him here with us. I'm like, perfect, that's fine, because I explained to them what happened that night. Tyler did not want to come home with me. He wanted to stay with my mom. But in staying with my mom, he was acting out. And so the police would have to be called at various times. So whenever he would act out, they would always ask me, well, do you have guardianship? I'm like, I don't even know what guardianship is. Well, we can't do anything because he's 18. We're not going to chase him if he has mental health problems. Isn't that your job? Like, that's what I'm thinking to myself. You're the police. Like, I thought if I called you that you would apprehend him. We can't do anything. You're not his guardian. We can't do anything. And the times that he was taken to an emergency room hospital, he was evaluated and released into a cab to be sent to a homeless shelter. My mind was just blown at how this process was unfolding. And so finally, I have a cousin in social work, and I have a sister-in-law in social work as well. And so my cousin is the one that told me, yeah, you need to file for guardianship, and told me what to do. So I got that process rolling with guardianship. And so once I had my attorney secure and everything, I was also in the process of moving from Missouri to Georgia during this whole time. And so I explained to him, like, I'm in the process of moving. Is that going to matter because my son is here? And so he explained to me, no, that would be fine. And he said, but I'm going to warn you that it usually takes months for everything to go through. I started the process for guardianship in June of 2017. By July of 17, right before I left, I had temporary guardianship. And by October of 17, I flew back in and had full guardianship and conservatorship for my son. Now, it was a whole lot of court going on and things of that nature. We had to testify, give testimony and things like that, doctor statements, witness statements, all of those things in order to for me to even receive that. But it all happened. And so in the course of that happening, I was able to get my son into a level 2 facility. And he was good in those level 2 facilities that he was in, to the point where he was able to be stabilized on his meds, and he was able to matriculate. So he was able to miss some steps and actually go into a program which was TLP, a transitional living program. And under that program, he was allowed to live in his own apartment. However, the program had rules and guidelines that they had to follow, but he could come and go as he pleased. But he was stable enough to live on his own in that way. And so, to the point where I would send him his money, he would get a money order, pay his rent. He had a case manager to help keep him on track if he needed to go somewhere, do little things like that, take him to his doctor's appointments, keep him up to date on all those things. But those are the things that I was allowed to do as the guardian. And because he was more stable in his mindset, he stayed with the plan. And so he was successful. He was successful for almost 3 years. And then all hell broke loose. Tyler decided, let me say, Tyler has never fully accepted at all his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. To the point where, even though he had a psychiatrist, he never wanted to talk to the psychiatrist. And because he was stable and he was living on his own and he was doing so well with the case manager and being under the program, I did not force him to do his psychiatry appointments as he needed to be. He would go to group inside, within the apartment complex. They had that, but he was not an active participant from what I was told. So almost 3 years in, he kept saying, I'm tired of getting these injections, because as the guardian and conservator, I forced in the monthly injection because he was not consistent with the oral medications as he should have been. And so he's like, I'm tired of this. And he was making up all kind of excuses why he couldn't take the drug, talking about it was had embalming fluid in it. He would send me, one thing about my son, he's a researcher. He's very intelligent and he loves to research things. So he would send me these articles about the chemicals that were in there and how they're harmful, but that's in any medication. And so I would just try to encourage him. His case manager family would try to encourage him, like, look, you're doing so well, stay on your regimen, just stay focused. And so, but he had a mind of his own, and that's no pun intended. But he wanted to do his own thing. I think part of it was him getting together with the wrong person or people who were saying, oh, you don't need to be in at a certain time, which the curfew was 11:59. If he wanted to go back out at 12:01 a.m., he could. So that's really not even a curfew if you really think about it. And so the only other thing, they randomly drug test you. And so he hadn't been smoking marijuana. And that's the thing. So he was off of marijuana, but the people he was around smoked marijuana all the time, and that's his vice. And so he was just like, he wanted to smoke. He was dropping dirty urine. It became an issue where they were threatening to kick him out of the place, but because they liked me and they liked him, they always, gave him chances to stay. And so fast forward to his second psychotic break around December of 2020. This was during the end of the pandemic. And he told me he had a girlfriend, or a girl that he was dating, quote unquote. And he wanted to get her something for Christmas. So he asked me if I could give him a bigger allowance so he could buy her a gift. So I didn't think anything about it. And I did it because it's his money and I gave it to him. And so next thing I know, that was Christmas Eve. And yeah, that was Christmas Eve. I didn't hear from him on Christmas Day, which was different because usually he'll text or call or something. And because it's the holiday, that's what he does. And so I didn't hear from him. So 2 or 3 days had passed. And so I called the complex and I'm like, hey, has anybody seen Tyler, like physically seen Tyler? They were like, well, he normally leaves out pretty early in the mornings and then he'll come back, you know, right before curfew at night. And I'm like, okay, but has anybody physically seen him in the past 2 or 3 days? And they were like, no, we haven't. So I'm like, okay, when you see him, give me a call. And so fast forward, I'm in my car. I get a call on Facebook Messenger, and it's Tyler. I'm like, where are you? And he was like, I'm in Texas. Texas? What are you doing in Texas? You're supposed to be in Missouri. That's why they haven't called me to say they physically laid eyes on you at that apartment. And he said, yeah, I'm in Texas. So I didn't believe him. And so I said, let me see where you are. And the surroundings did not look familiar. He was inside of a library. I said, so since you're in the library, let me speak to a worker, put a worker on the camera, you know, so I can verify where you are. So there was a worker nearby who had on a tag and everything and a shirt with the name of the library. And so she said, yeah, he's here, he's in Texas. I about lost it. And I said, you need to get to Georgia as soon as possible. I said, because he claimed he was out there looking for a job. But you don't go to Texas to look for a job when you can't even keep a job in Kansas City. Like, it just made no sense. And I knew that he had refused his last injection. And so I was just like, okay, this is not going to work for me. So you need to come to where I am. So I got him a one-way ticket to Georgia. And when he was at the airport, just a stranger, out of the kindness of his heart, I asked him to ask someone if he would help him in getting back to me. So when he got to Atlanta, I picked him up from the airport. And as cold as it was in Dallas at that time in December of 2020, the only thing he had on were a pair of sweats, some tennis shoes, a shirt, a long sleeve, I think a thermal shirt. And he had on, so one of those swim towels that has the elastic around the top, so it looks like a little halter towel when you put it on, the women use. It was one of those gray things. He had that wrapped around him like a cape, and that was his coat. Hair was a mess. And so he refused to stay with me. He refused to stay with his sister, so I had to put him in a motel for a few days until I could figure out what to do. So finally, I was able to fly him and myself to Kansas City. I convinced him that we needed to clean out his apartment in order for them to release him from his contract there. And so he agreed to fly home with me. And that's when we were able to get him apprehended again. Once we got him back to the apartment, I was able to coordinate with the manager and KCPD and the fire department to come to the apartment complex. And at that point, he was apprehended based on my guardianship and conservatorship status. And they were able to put him on a hold and eventually into another level 2 facility. The first facility he was in lost his medical records. He never got the injection, the first injection he was supposed to have while he was there. It was just a whole lot of back and forth with those people. The facility was trash. So I transferred him to a second facility after a while. And the first few days of being there, he didn't have linen on the bed that he was supposed to sleep in. He never received the clothes out of storage that were transported from the first facility that he was in. So he had been in the same clothes for like 2 or 3 days. They didn't give him a towel to shower. It was a whole nightmare. So I flew into Kansas City because things weren't right. And so it was right before his birthday. And so I discharged him from that facility into his grandmother's care, which is his father's mother. And so she had rules, and he didn't necessarily want to comply with the rules of her house. So he asked me if he could go stay with a cousin. And I trusted that cousin, and based off of, confirmation of that with another relative, I said agreed for him to stay there, and they were splitting the rent. And so I thought the situation was going to be good, and it was for a while. He even got a job working at Dairy Queen. He was doing great. He was back on his meds. He had a case manager assigned. He was under a new hospital care, and so everybody was on the same page. Everybody was doing all the things we were supposed to do, until December came again, and he decided he wanted to not be on the injection. He decided he didn't want to be in that living situation anymore. He was smoking marijuana every single day, pretty much nonstop, and that habit is expensive. And so he decided to start dodging his case manager. He decided he wasn't going to go get his injection in November, and by December 10th, he was gone again. One day I was just thinking, like, this is not happening again. Like, I am going to have to file another missing persons report. And I began to think about the month of December, because every single time my son decided to run, when he had those psychotic episodes, it's around December. And when I think about it, it goes back to the very first time in December of 2015, after he had graduated high school and things were going well for him, and he had had a physical fight with his father. And I had already explained to you earlier that there's always been a source of contention there, and just a missing piece as far as that is concerned. And that had me shook, because to my knowledge, his dad has never disciplined him or ever put hands on him. On top of that, my son had dreads, and he forced him to cut all his hair off. And that's when we kind of tailspin into a spiral. And I feel, this is my personal feelings, that was the beginning of the traumatic experience that spun my son into his psychotic break. And so in learning of my son's diagnosis and studying it just to be knowledgeable in how to deal with him, I've learned that psychosis is hereditary, and that even with me carrying him in my belly, that he had that gene for psychosis. It's nothing that could be detected, but it can be onset by the use of marijuana. And because we did not know that it was a condition that was lying dormant, the use of that hallucinant, which is marijuana, intensified his psychosis and brought it to surface on top of the traumatic event. And usually within males, they say it happens between the ages of 18 and 24 years old. And my son's started exhibiting symptoms at 18 and was diagnosed before his 19th birthday. And then when we were going back and forth to court concerning my guardianship and conservatorship, it was revealed on the stand when his father testified against me, because he didn't want me to have the guardianship and conservatorship, because he felt like he could roam the country as he pleased because he was an adult. It came to light that he has the same diagnosis. And that was the first time I ever heard that or knew that he had the same thing. So it is hereditary. And marijuana will onset psychosis faster than any opioid. And people don't realize, people think that marijuana is just a recreational drug, and it can be for many people. But then there are a few people, such as my son, who it actually sets off his psychotic and mindset. And then when you couple that with a traumatic experience, it's a recipe for disaster. When my son went missing this past time, which was December 2021, I filed a missing persons report with KCPD, and just prayed for the best. But I said from the very beginning, I said he's not in Kansas City anymore. I had my Kansas City people looking for him, but I knew he wasn't in Kansas City anymore, because my son always wants to be in a warmer climate, and he wants to be somewhere where he can smoke weed at will. He likes to cultivate it and grow it. So he wants to be in those environments. And so I said, even though my Kansas City people, my village was looking for him, I said, I don't think he's there. I think he's somewhere on the West Coast. And so fast forward to March of 2022, I received a call from Kansas City Police Department saying, we've recovered your son. He is alive. I need you to call San Diego County Police Department, because they're the one that made the recovery. He is in San Diego. I was so relieved, but I was so mad at him, because here we are on another wild goose chase. And so the next morning, I fly out to San Diego, and I'm talking to the police department soon as I land. Well, we can tell you where we dropped him off, but we can't tell you if he's there. In fact, we can't give you any other information, because he's an adult. And because of the law, regardless of me having guardianship and conservatorship, and at that time I kept saying guardianship, I'm his guardian, I have my paperwork, they said he's an adult. They're protected here in California. So basically, I was out there peeing in the wind. So because of the type of mama that I am, I said, okay, all I need is a lead, and I'll follow it. Drop my things off at the hotel, put on my tennis shoes, hit the ground running. Literally hit the ground running. Walked entire downtown San Diego from top to bottom. Walked it the entire first day there. And I was wore out. I had a picture on my phone, because I didn't think to do a printout. Had a picture of my son on my phone. Went to all of these homeless tents. I was blown away by the number of homeless tents that are just lined up for blocks and blocks on each side of the street, as if they own San Diego downtown. The bridges lined with tents. And I was thinking to myself, how in the world am I gonna find him? And so I'm literally knocking on tents, talking to homeless people, showing him pictures of my son. Some I found fruitful, some I did not. Went to the library, because they're allowed to hang out there. Walked, didn't find him there. So night came, I went back to the hotel, feeling so defeated. But I said, okay, my flight got delayed. So I was like, perfect. Got up super early in the morning, went to different places like NAMI and other places that have homeless outreach and things of that nature, asking questions. Same thing. We can't tell you anything. I think I saw him. Yeah, I saw him, but we can't tell you any other information about him. So, okay, fine. I'm going to keep looking. When I left NAMI, I said to God, you can let me walk right into my son. I said, my flight is leaving in a few hours. I have to literally be at the airport in a few minutes. And I said, but you can let me walk right into my son. I literally left out of NAMI's door, walked up one block, and made a right up a hill. Coming down the hill, I see a person whose build seems to fit my son, but his head is down and he has on a mask. I get closer. As I get closer, he looks up. I see his eyes and I call his name. And he looks like he saw a deer in the headlights. And he said, "What are you doing here?" He was shook because he wasn't expecting me to walk up on him. God answered my prayer that fast till I literally was walking up the hill. My son was walking down and he looked up and we connected eyes. And my prayer was that he wouldn't be in a full psychotic mode because he had been off his meds at that time for almost 3 months. And he was still in his right mind. And he had all of these things in place that shocked me, even a case manager. And so I left him there. Went back in October to check on him. He had been in and out of homeless shelters. His safe haven was a community center they have set up there for homeless people. And so that's where we would meet to connect. And even though he wasn't in the best mental health state, he still wasn't where I thought I needed to intervene. Because again, he still had these other checks and balances in place. And he was still working on housing. I left him. When I left, I did not hear from my son for a month. And I was getting worried. Fast forward to December, the first week of December, he finally reached out, asked for some money. And in the course of October to February, which I had already told him I'm coming back to check on him after the first of the year, he got another phone and he started video calling me. And you'll see some of the footage of the conversation. And he was so dark. And his hair was a complete mess. I didn't understand anything he was saying. He would just be so angry and going off on people that were walking by.
Nigga will pay you to fuck what? So I have to call it that. You smell like a whore anyway. Are you get a fire duty, bitch? I'm about to destroy your family member. You should never try to pull up over with no motherfucking Smith & Billy, pussy. You smell like you only found there how to get more pussy, you dirty bitch. You smell worse than the motherfucker where the problems are. Nigga, I swear to God, just retarded. What was your fucking point in putting it over there? You drink all the way 7 skies high. And then you don't need to store you up. You just gotta call this 7 skies high, right? But you just believe in the stupid nigga. Shouldn't you be in me, Jekyll? Should have lived your life. Should have came back from school, stove behind. Just leave it under college building.
To the point where I felt like an urgency. I have to go see about my son. So I go out to see about my son. He was coherent enough to understand that I'm going to meet you at the community center, be there. Got to the community center. He wasn't there. So I'm video calling him. He's not answering. And so he finally meets me. And so on my route into San Diego, I was calling some resources, found out about they have what's called PERT, which is a psychiatry emergency response team. And they come out with the police to do a on-site assessment. So when we checked into the hotel, I called them. That was a whole nightmare in itself, which we'll talk about at a different time. But they came out, did an immediate assessment, and put him in a psych facility. And because California refuses to recognize my guardianship and conservatorship from Missouri, everything was on my son's own recognizance. They still said that he had to sign a waiver for them to talk to me. It was a whole mess. And so they said that not to worry about it. They would have him to sign, and that they would put him on a 72-hour hold, and that he would have to speak with the judge, and the judge would determine if he would be granted another 14 days. And then the judge would reassess after that 14 days And it was a whole long, drawn out process. Long story short, the judges there side with the mental health patients. I knew that my son, after his 72 hold was up, was going to be kicked back into the homeless community. So I pled with the hospital, look, I have paperwork, I need him released to my custody. And fortunately, because the favor of God is on my life, at least when it comes to my son, they were cooperative with me. And so when his time was up, he did not see the judge, and he ended up being released to my custody. And so from there, I was able to, I didn't have an ID because he lost his California ID. All I took with me was a birth certificate, his social security card. I had his medical records. I had my paperwork saying I'm his Missouri guardian. And I didn't even know if we were going to be able to make it through TSA because I didn't have a physical ID. Had a copy of it on my phone, but that was it. Got to the airport with him, and the supervisor, TSA supervisor, looked at all my documents, allowed us to make it through. We got back to Georgia, had no clue what I was going to do with my son. I just knew that he needed help.
You're not allowed to go to another famous crackhead. Okay. Why the fuck you would be counting and get the real crack while you would? When it was just substance abuse. Now y'all characterized of it. Why are you eating? Why is you in the worms? Ain't no nigga get you worms with crack bit on your skin. Nigga, you chose to be a free bound to even get on crack or touch it. Our carbonized level was squared. You just look around and be like, you box it up, okay, how good it get pushed over. Not that you stock up and not for albeit, but wherever that was you'll be doing that for.
So I was able to finally find a facility in Georgia. They were super nice. The process was seamless. They were able to get him, take him immediately based off of the initial assessment. And that's where he is today. So to give you all some helpful hints, if you are in a situation or you know someone who has an adult person, it could be a child or some type of kinship who is suffering from mental health illness, I would suggest that you research it through the states you're in. One thing that I've learned is that guardianship and conservatorship go hand in hand in many states. Missouri is one of them. But in California, they only recognize conservatorship for adults with disabilities or mental illness. So if you're living in a state, definitely research what you need. I will tell you, because the person is an adult, they do have rights because they're adults. However, if the situation is such as mine is with my son with schizophrenia, I've learned that you will get further with legal documents. And I know that sometimes it can be costly, but it's worth it in the long run, because right now I'm in Georgia. And although my paperwork has Missouri on it, they are still treating me as if I matter. They still are treating me as if I'm responsible for my son. Now, eventually, I may have to get those documents transferred to Georgia through those courts. But right now, they're not giving me the pushback that I received out of the state of California. So I'm saying it's very important that anytime anybody has any questions they want to ask me concerning that, because of what I've gone through in several different states and even another country, which is Mexico, please feel free to reach out, to comment, because I do have some resources even in Mexico now that could possibly help you along the way if that's necessary. So don't feel alone, don't feel defeated, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, I've had to manipulate and lie to my son sometimes to get him where I needed to be, but in the grand scheme of things, the end goal is for my son to be healthy, my son to be whole, my son to be independent, and that's all I ever wanted for him. A hard thing that I had to learn with this diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia is the guilt that I have as a mother. It's hard to see my son in handcuffs being taken away by officers. It's hard to see my son. When I initially saw him in a locked facility, I cried. The initial medication they had him on blew him up. Anybody that knows my son knows that he is a very slim frame, about 145, 150 pounds. He was up to about 200 when I saw him, and it broke me down. And I still struggle today. You know, like, did I make the right choice? Should I have brought him back to Georgia? Do I keep chasing him across the length and breadth of this country? You know, do I want to leave him out there in a homeless community because in his mind, that's where his comfort zone is? But as a parent and as a guardian and a conservator, it is my job to make sure that his basic needs are met. And his basic needs are not met out on the streets. It would be no difference if my son was diagnosed with cancer, lupus, MS, or any other crippling or potentially deadly disease. I would get help for him if he had those things. It's no different with mental health. You have to get the help. Resources are out there, but a lot of times people aren't concerned because it hasn't hit their house. One thing my mom used to say, what hasn't hit you hasn't passed you. So I don't pass judgment. When I see homeless people now, I look at them in a different light because that's my son out there. I look at them as if that's my son begging for money. That's my son begging for food. That's my son that needs shoes on his feet or clothes on his back. So I don't discredit those people because they're still people. And my son gets mad at me. Like, he stays mad at me because he doesn't want the guardianship. He doesn't want me to be his voice because he has yet to accept that he has paranoid schizophrenia. Even the other day when we were discussing it in the assessment, and I said, yes, he's been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He said, I don't have that ish. And he said the actual word. But I'm just like, you have the first step to recovery, they say, is acceptance. Once he can accept that, then he can move forward and be successful. I don't believe that my son is going to live with this the rest of his life. My faith is just that crazy. I am a religious person, and I just believe God for everything. He's brought me too far to leave me, and I believe that my son would not go to his grave with this illness. We're going to do everything proactively. I'm going to help you all. If you need the help, reach out, because I have a plethora of resources that I've had to learn through trial and error. When you call on someone who has a mental health issue, most people dial 911. If you do that, that is absolutely fine. But know that in most states, you need to ask for a CIT team. That is they are trained to come out and handle people with mental health issues. That means that your child or your loved one is not going to be shot down because they're acting erratic. And so in California, they have what's called the PERT, P-E-R-T team. Call and ask for them. In Georgia, the mental health number is 988. So there are resources out there. There are studies available where the person can go in and do they can stay there and for several weeks and do a study and receive money. People can walk out with as much as $6,000. The different stages that I've experienced with my son, and this is something that people don't tell you or that you may not know, or it could just be isolated to what I've experienced with him. But in the initial stage of the psychosis, it was a lot of anger. It was a lot of dangerous behavior going on. He like doused me with a bucket of cleaning products, a mix of Lysol and all kind of stuff. I don't know what all was in there to this day. But he would do things like that. He would carry a weapon on him, meaning a knife or some type of pocket knife, because he was always, you know, threatening people and doing things like that. It was a lot of rage, a lot of anger, always talking about what he was going to do to somebody else, not necessarily himself, because a lot of people think he's supposed to be suicidal. I've never known him to be suicidal or have suicidal thoughts or tendencies, but as far as harming other people, absolutely yes. And you know, there are changes that happen. Like even right now in this stage of his psychosis, he's more calm. It doesn't make sense, but he doesn't want people to touch him, but he and his sister, myself and his sister, to at least trim his hair.
I own those words. Now the reason why I left it open so long is to know so people were going to allow me to take those words when I first said it. Now I first said them before this video could be uploaded. Now this video was uploaded 9 days into my life today. So up to the 10th day.
That's something he would have never allowed in the initial onset of the psychosis. He's more respectful and more aware of what's going on this time around than he's been before. The homelessness is new. Like before, he never wanted to be homeless. He just knew he didn't want to be under my authority because of the paperwork that I had legally. But him just being in a tent and being okay, being outside in the elements and digging in trash, looking for stuff, this is something new. Multiple layers of clothes, because when you're in the homeless community, a lot of times you don't have anywhere to put these things. So the last time I saw him in October, before this time, he was layered up. He had on pants and shorts and overalls and multiple shirts and things like that. And right now his fixation is with chimneys. Everything is about building a chimney. Not sure what that means. When he looks at trees, he says, look at all this paper. Now we know technically paper does come from trees, but normal people don't say, look at that paper outside. They say, look at those trees. He's obsessed with flames. Everything is about a flame, not just a cigarette flame or a burner flame. He doesn't want anything cooked on the stove. It has to be in the microwave or some fast food restaurant. Chemicals. If I have a cleaning business, so he went with me the other day to clean my building, and he was getting agitated because I was using products to sanitize the building, and he kept saying it's full of flames, look at all these chemicals. He's like getting a bottle and reading all the ingredients in there. He's obsessed with black now, the color black. We can't say the color black. He calls it carbon. So he's like, oh, it's not black, it's carbon. You gotta say it's carbon. I'm at my daughter's house filming this video. He would not sit on her couch because of the color. It isn't black. Everything that he has in his possession right now, he wanted me to dye it black. It wasn't already black. So before, he could have conversations that made sense. Now his brain is just like a little bit more scrambled, to where he can be talking to me and saying something, and then the next thing I know, he's rambling on something else, or something that doesn't even make sense. I also notice his sleep pattern. Now, I don't know if because of the lack of meds, or it could be, or the meds that he just got started on. I'm sorry, the fact that he hasn't slept in almost a year consistently, or what, or a combination of things. But I notice how little babies, when you get in, as soon as you get in the car, at least my kids did when they were young, we go down the street a couple of blocks and they're knocked out. Well, he's the same way, and he talks non-stop, gibberish, don't know what it is, all over the place. Like he'll be in a car and he'll just be talking up a storm, and I usually just ignore it because he's not talking to me. And so sometimes he'll look at me and say, I don't even like you. Or sometimes say, I'll beat your ass. And I'm like, okay, and I'm like, I don't know where in the world it comes from. It's just out of nowhere. And then he'll just go back to talking to himself like he normally does. And then when it gets quiet, I'll look over and he'll be knocked out, just sleep. And then when we stop to get somewhere, he'll pop up and start talking again like he hadn't slept a wink. So there's different levels, different phases to the psychosis that I myself have personally witnessed with my son. I don't know if anybody else has gone through it, but I'm here for you. Again, it's Life Legacy Foundation Incorporated. Reach out to us on all social media platforms. If you have questions, please put them in the comments, and I will do my level best to answer every single question. And stay tuned for more videos because they're coming. This journey on this leg of this trip has literally just begun again. He's in the hospital, only been in there a day and a half now. And so I haven't received any updates as to whether they'll keep him or move him to another location. But all of that is going to be journaled. Now, mind you, because of HIPAA laws, I'm not able to record inside a facility. So anything I can record of him personally, I will definitely do that, and it will be included in these videos. Until next time, you guys be safe. Peace, love, and Life Legacy Foundation.